Take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
CannabisRadio.com presents The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Hey, this is great, man.
Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Friday, February 26, 2016, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Thanks for joining us. We made it to the weekend. So glad you could make it here with us. We're coming to you 2 hours later in my body clock because it's 5 o'clock Central Time. I'm talking to you from Arlington, Texas, the headquarters of DFW Normal. Right between the D and the FW is where Arlington is, right? But you can't call it DAFW because then it's DAFW, and then it just gets weird. So anyway, we're right in the middle of the DFW Metroplex where today there was big political news in the very building where we will be at the Southwest Cannabis Conference and Expo in Fort Worth, Texas tomorrow, discussing the need for legalization, medical marijuana, decriminalization, any sort of reform for Texas. In that very same building today, Donald Trump held a rally, and at that rally, Chris Christie, the redundantly named governor of New Jersey, endorsed Donald Trump in that very building. So all sorts of interesting things going on here in Fort Worth, and we've got all sorts of interesting things to talk about on today's show. Special guest joining us at half past the hour is defense attorney Joseph Tully. He is representing the case in People versus Aaron O'Neill. This is a case where a medical cannabis grower in California, growing over 200 plants, being prosecuted on the eve of California likely legalizing marijuana and making moves to industrialize its medical marijuana. He asks, why does this prosecution need to go forward with someone who is clearly trying to help sick and disabled people in the state of California, where this marks the 20th anniversary of medical marijuana? We'll talk to attorney Joseph Tully coming up at half past. Also on the show today, we've got some behind the headlines to take a look at. Two stories that answer the question of the prohibitionist: what about the children? Something that we like to call WOTC here on the show. What about the children? Well, we'll ask that question. What about the children in a couple of chilling cases that come from the front lines of America's drug war. Also on the show today in Drug War Data Mining, we are going to take a look at some interesting information that was revealed from a congresswoman from Connecticut having to do with the issue of drug testing for welfare. We've got some very interesting statistics to bring to you on the idea of welfare fraud in the government and how that relates to this issue of drug testing for welfare. And then at the end of the show, we'll have time for a radical rant where I go back to the subject we talked about earlier this week, and that is, why should there be a demarcation between medical and recreational marijuana as we move forward? And would it be wise for states like Texas to just move straight to legalization and avoid medical marijuana altogether? We'll take a look at the pros and cons of that issue in the Radical Rant at the end of the show. But first, as we always do, we start with the Cannabis Radio News. And in the news today, we have got headlines for you from Montana, where their Supreme Court made a ruling on medical marijuana. We've got news from Alaska on their first day of license applications. Wyoming still moving to ban edibles that had been made legal through a loophole, taking away possible felonies for those edibles. Lawmaker introducing legalization in the state of Michigan. Minneapolis, Minnesota bringing its decrim law in to match its state law. And in Washington state, a new proposed rule on out-of-state financing. Things are weird here in Texas for me. I can't explain it. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with the Cannabis Radio News right after this.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
When you are starting up a medical cannabis business, you want a fired-up lawyer who understands the needs of cannabis consumers. The law office of Lauren Vasquez is your fired-up lawyer for the cannabis industry. Visit her website, fireduplawyer.com, or call 1-855-MMJ-LAWS for more information. That's 855-665-5297 for Lauren Vasquez, your fired-up lawyer, or email fireduplawyer@gmail.com.
NORMAL stands for Responsible Adult Cannabis Use. If cannabis use is causing problems in your life, consider taking a break or seeking medical assistance. Consider ceasing cannabis use if you have a family history of mental illness. Don't drive or operate heavy machinery while impaired by cannabis use. Cannabis use is not without risks, even though the risks may be far less than those posed by legal drugs.
From high atop Mount Soledad in San Diego, California, 100 feet above sea level. Good morning. It's good news with cannabis nurse Heather.
This plant is amazing. Positive change is happening. We did it. No matter who you are, you can make a positive impact on the world.
I would rather be illegally alive than legally dead.
And that quote helped to give you strength.
Nurse Heather is only on CannabisRadio.com.
Good morning, cannabis nurse Heather.
It's time for the Cannabis Radio News, covering the latest headlines in consumer cannabis, medical marijuana, and industrial hemp. Cannabis Radio News is now available exclusively at CannabisRadio.com. Now your marijuana headlines in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. This is Cannabis Radio News.
This is your Cannabis Radio News for Friday, February 26, 2016. The Montana Supreme Court ruled Thursday that medical marijuana providers should be paid for their services, but it clamped down on commercial sales of the drug by limiting providers to no more than 3 patients each. The court's decision upheld other provisions of a 2011 state law that represents one of the most significant rollbacks attempted by the 23 states and Washington, D.C. that allow marijuana to be used for medical purposes. The law, meant to curb abuses that led to a flourishing marijuana industry in Montana 5 years ago, would have banned medical pot providers from receiving any compensation. The court said the sales ban would leave some patients with debilitating illnesses with no available source for their medicine. However, the court upheld the requirement that marijuana providers can take on a maximum of 3 patients each. The justices also upheld provisions of the law that ban medical marijuana advertising and create an automatic review for doctors who recommend medical marijuana to more than 25 patients. State regulators report that 68 Alaska marijuana business license applications were initiated online Wednesday. The Alaska Marijuana Control Board says it's not limited in the number of licenses it can issue, and there's no deadline to apply. The board will review applications at regularly scheduled meetings year-round. Officials anticipate beginning the review process in mid-March for applications submitted this week. Local governments will have an opportunity to protest. The board plans to approve the first testing and cultivation facility licenses in June. Product manufacturing and retail store licenses will be processed next. The state anticipates the first manufacturing and retail store licenses to be approved in September. A Wyoming legislative committee on Thursday moved to make possession of marijuana brownies and other foods and beverages containing marijuana to be a misdemeanor. The Wyoming Senate earlier this week called for making it a felony to possess more than 3 ounces of food or drink containing marijuana or its active ingredients. However, the House Judiciary Committee on Thursday stripped out the felony language, leaving the bill instead with a system of increasingly stiff misdemeanor penalties for repeated convictions of possessing food or beverages containing THC, the active compound in marijuana. The full House must still act on the bill before a conference committee could try to resolve any differences between the House and Senate versions. Wyoming has seen a spike in possession of marijuana edibles and beverages since Colorado legalized recreational marijuana use in 2014. District Judge Stephen Sharp of Cheyenne last year ruled that existing state law outlawing marijuana refers specifically to its plant form. A state lawmaker has introduced legislation to legalize recreational use of marijuana in Michigan, a move he says will free up police to, quote, focus on violent and property crimes, end quote. Introduced by State Senator Coleman A. Young II, a Democrat of Detroit, the bill is being called the Non-Medical Marijuana Code. Senate Bill 813 would regulate and tax marijuana, generating revenue for education and other public purposes. Young's measure would regulate growing facilities, dispensaries, and marijuana lounges where people could indulge in pot-infused brownies without fear of arrest. Smoking pot in public would not be allowed. Violators could be hit with a $100 fine. Under the measure, Michigan residents will be able to possess up to an ounce of marijuana and 5 marijuana plants. Non-residents would be limited to 1/2 ounce. Minneapolis voted Friday to sync its marijuana possession law to match existing state rules, reducing the crime from a misdemeanor to a petty misdemeanor. The change is expected to have, quote, no minimal or no impact, end quote, because Minneapolis police rely on the state statute when charging small-scale marijuana crimes, according to a staff report. A petty misdemeanor is technically not a crime under state law, since they are not punishable by jail time. The change passed the city council unanimously on Friday. Washington state regulators have allowed only those who've resided in Washington for 6 months to be owners or financiers in the state's legal pot industry. But a proposed rule change before the Liquor and Cannabis Board would drop the residency requirement for financiers, though they'd have to undergo criminal background checks, could only loan money to business owners, and couldn't own any stakes in the Washington companies. This has been your Cannabis Radio News for Friday, February 26, 2016. I'm Russ Belville.
The next generation of vaporizers has arrived. Vuber vaporizers are blazing the way with unparalleled technology for oil, concentrate, or dry flower pens. Providing unsurpassed customer service and expert craftsmanship, Vuber vaporizers use cutting-edge technology, providing a power-packed, smoother vapor with a lifetime guarantee. Experience vaporizing the way it was meant to be. The Vuber way.
This is Cannabis Facts from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org, supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. In 1937, the second most prescribed medicine, marijuana, was banned. It wasn't about marijuana. The paper, oil, and chemical industries lobbied to end hemp farming. No longer labor-intensive, an acre of hemp produced more quality paper than 4 acres of trees. Plastics and fibers could be produced from a plant. Hemp can even produce 10 times the energy of today's ethanol. As marijuana prohibition ends, many states now allow farmers to again grow hemp. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to process America's hemp crop at hempinc.com.
With over 6 years of experience in the industry, New Era CPAs is one of the nation's leading cannabis accounting firms, helping hundreds of growers, dispensaries, and ancillary companies with their tax, legal, and business strategies. New Era CPA's offices cover the West Coast from Seattle to San Diego, and their skilled team is always available to help you take your business to the next level. Visit neweracpas.com for more info and set up a consultation. Welcome to the New Era.
Every strain, every sale, every medical study. Keep it right here on the Cannabis Radio Network.
The world of cannabis is evolving at a frenetic pace. The Russ Belville Show gets behind the headlines to take a deeper look at breaking news in our Cannabis Focus.
Today in our Cannabis Focus, I want to ask the question, what about the children? It's something our opponents ask all the time when we propose legalizing medical marijuana or recreational marijuana. What about the children? And I always like to turn this back on our opponents and ask, what about the children under prohibition? What about those children? And there's 2 stories that kind of caught my eye. And this first story comes to us from Detroit, Michigan. Actually, Redford Township. Now, Detroit is a majority black city. Redford Township is one of those white suburbs of Detroit, where WJBK reports, this is a Fox station in Detroit, that a 6-year-old boy was kicked off his basketball team after the Athletic Association found his father's marijuana smell inappropriate. Yes, Deshaun is the little boy's name, 6-year-old. kicked off the Redford Township Junior Athletic Association Thunder basketball team. Kicked off the basketball team. And according to the story, the father came to a game and he smelled like pot and he was asked to leave and he left. But then weeks later, he came back to the gym smelling like pot and he was asked to leave. And then he had a verbal argument with a school official who asked him to leave. And she says she was assaulted. The grandfather dismisses this and says there's no truth to that. The grandson, the 6-year-old, was allowed to play in 2 more games before the Athletic Association removed him from the team. The Athletic Association tells Fox 2 that, quote, the dismissal of the family from our basketball program was a direct result of actions and threats made by the student-athlete's father. This is a 6-year-old, mind you, student-athlete. This incident fell under restrictions stated in our code of conduct. Unfortunately, we were unable to retain the student-athlete. This was a decision that was not taken lightly and was only made final after several attempts were made to resolve the situation with the parents, end quote. Now, okay, it's kind of a bare bones story, whether or not the father overreacted, got, verbally abusive or whatever, I can't speak to. But what drove him to that point was being asked to leave because he smelled like pot. Now, the clincher in this case is that he's a medical marijuana patient in the state of Michigan. He's got every reason to smell like pot. It's his medicine. So are we to say here that someone who's a medical marijuana patient can't watch their child and be there for those events? So, well, he just doesn't have to smell like pot. Have a brownie or, yeah. Well, screw you telling somebody how they have to medicate, how they have to take care of themselves. For a lot of people, smoking is the best option for them. It's the one that works the best for them and leaves them in it. And if this is a case of a smell being overwhelming and offending people, then I hope the same standard is spent for the guys with the Axe body spray and the women that are douched in perfume that you might find as parents at one of these 6-year-old basketball games. And for me, it's like, okay, even if that's the case, even if it's the marijuana, and even if that's just so offensive that people have a moral bigotry against it, kick the dad out. What are you doing kicking the 6-year-old kid out because his dad smells like weed? What about the children? What happens when this kid who liked basketball and was making friends can no longer do that because daddy smells like pot? And what does that do to the kid's self-esteem and his worldview? And the other story that caught my eye, this one coming to us from the New York Post, 2nd grader spills the beans on mom's boyfriend's pot farm. Now, we've heard these stories before, but this is White River Junction, Vermont. The 2nd grader said to the detective that he helped his mother's boyfriend grow, quote, special medicine that can cure anything at all, end quote. So the 8-year-old's just talking about the medical marijuana garden. And the boy told her people came to the Windsor house frequently. 54-year-old Stephen Mann pleaded not guilty this week in a White River Junction court to felony count of cultivating more than 25 marijuana plants. They found 2 grow rooms next to the child's bedroom. Oh no, there were house plants next to a child. Danger, danger, Will Robinson. This is just part of what really offends me about having to tell these stories is the implicit bias of the media writing them, that there's somehow this terrible danger that these kids were under from being next to houseplants. No, the danger, if any, that they were under is the fact that prohibition would make those houseplants worth enough to steal, worth someone to break in on. But by that measure, people can't have diamonds. People can't have art. People can't have anything that's worth stealing for someone. And again, Vermont is a state that has a very restricted, but has a medical marijuana program. No evidence that this story has anything to do with medical marijuana in this case. But what it does have to do with is, once again, teaching a child that if he's honest, if he tells the truth to authority figures, it breaks up his family. It sends people to jail and leaves this kid with a sense of guilt that what he did to hurt mom's friend and possible, future relationship that might have been. Now the economic problem of having to go to court and defend themselves.
MFer, I want more iced tea.
And that's just the sad part about this. What about the children? Well, what about all the children whose lives are upended by prohibition? What about the children who are sick, like Texas's own Alexis Bortel, who have to flee off to Colorado just to live, have to leave behind their families, their grandparents, and their friends at school? Indeed, what about the children?
The Russ Belville Show is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association in the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com, and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit mjba.net for more details.
Hey, this is Willie Nelson for Normal. And I smoke pot and I like it a lot. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer than alcohol. There's nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting those who smoke marijuana responsibly. To learn what you can do to help, contact Normal at NORML.org or call toll-free 888-67-NORMAL.
Get the latest updates on the Russ Belville Show by following Radical Russ on Twitter and liking the Russ Belville Show on Facebook.
Great websites today need expert web design and development and need to be e-commerce ready and mobile friendly. But building a marketable and profitable website can be an uphill climb. Ready to make your new website or replace your existing website? Think Orange as the new way to get in the black. Orange Hill Development works with Fortune 500 companies and offer the same top quality development service at a fraction of what other providers charge. Brands like Absolute, Carlsberg, and Nestea trust Orange Hill Development. Find out why you should trust your website with Orange Hill. Contact Orange Hill for a consultation today at orangehilldevelopment.com.
Promoting the end of adult cannabis prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It's even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more on this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Today, as we go into the drug war data mines, I'm checking out a story that I found on Think Progress, and originally it was going to be the subject of a rant because it emphasized a point that people make in these discussions of drug testing that really offends me. This has to do with the states, many of them out there, Wisconsin, that's currently fighting this in court, about forcing people to take drug tests to be able to enroll in food stamps, which is known as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. In fact, we should just call it SNAP because, in fact, I think from a framing point of view, we ought to call it SNAP cards. That ought to be the terminology, SNAP cards, because people use the term food stamps and they think of it as the old school paper stamps that my mom had to use when I was a kid. You know, the paper stamps that you ripped out of a kind of a booklet. And people associate that with being able to trade those and sell those for other things and so forth. That doesn't exist anymore. They're SNAP cards. They're like an ATM card. You can only use it at the grocery store and only for the stuff that can go on that card. And I think that framing would help to reduce this thought that there's a lot of fraud in welfare when there really isn't. But as this was going through this, they're fighting this in court in Wisconsin about having states initiate drug testing for these welfare programs. And so this representative, Rosa DeLauro, she's a Democrat from Connecticut, in a subcommittee hearing asked why would we limit drug testing to just the people in the SNAP program, receiving food benefits, and not anybody else subsidized through the Department of Agriculture, like the farmers who get federal crop insurance and other federal subsidies. She said, quote, If we're going to look at drug testing for SNAP, we should take the entire Department of Agriculture and all those programs that provide federal subsidy to folks, and they ought to be drug tested as well, end quote. And this is a response we get sometimes from Democrats, from people on the left, that's like, oh, well, if you're going to drug test the people, why don't we drug test the legislators? Oh, well, if you're going to drug test this guy, as if more drug testing is the solution to this oppression. No, the solution to your oppression is to not oppress more people, to make it equal for everyone. No, we need to roll back this drug testing. So I had this big disagreement on that initial part of this article I'm reading. But then it got to some interesting data that I thought was worth mentioning, because we continue to see these attacks on poor people in the name of fighting the war on drugs. That, oh, well, they shouldn't spend their welfare money on drugs. Well, the fact is that most people on welfare don't spend their money on drugs. And the drug testing you do is disqualifying more likely the people who would spend it on marijuana. And if they're going to spend it on anything drug-wise, marijuana might be the one you'd want them to be spending it on compared to alcohol or crack or whatever. But some interesting statistics jump up, and that is that this SNAP program, the food benefits program, is very efficient. You know, a lot of the claim is that, oh, there's going to be fraud, there's going to be overpayment, but the food stamp overpayment rate is 2.61%. So they overpay by 2.61%. This is the, Congressional Bureau, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. SNAP error rates at all-time lows from 2014. All-time lows in the error rate, in the fraud or overpayment, down to 2.61%, lowest it's ever been. So it's not a partisan thing. That's Center for Budget and Policy. The difference between it and the crop insurance payment program that goes to farmers and goes to big agribusiness is 5.23%. That's their overpayment rate. So, I mean, the point about we should drug test the farmers and the agribusiness guys that are getting subsidies, I don't think that's the solution. I don't advocate more drug testing. But the point that they're the ones that are causing the overpayments, they're the ones that are causing a much larger share of the waste of Department of Agriculture dollars, is a very important point. And this drug testing for welfare, as we pointed out numerous times on the show, is not only inefficient. People on welfare do drugs at a rate usually less than the general population because, shock and surprise, drugs cost money. They actually cost money. Over the last 2 years, the states that have tried this drug testing for welfare have spent $2 million between them all and turned up 321 positive tests. So the money they've spent trying to catch people is far more than the money they would have spent if they would have just given these alleged druggies their benefits in the first place. But don't expect math, science, reason, logic, compassion to have any bearing on this debate for some of these people. Some of it's just bigotry against the poor times bigotry against drug users, and they're looking for a way to punish them. This is a moral issue to them. This is a manner of, if the government gives you welfare, gives you help, gives you assistance, we're approving of you, we're approving of your lifestyle, and therefore we need to not approve of it. We need to not give you money, not give you these benefits. Which is an ironic argument coming from the people who are oftentimes claiming to be those who stand for freedom. Freedom in the American way. Well, guess what? Freedom applies to making bad decisions too. At what point does the government giving someone a benefit change from gently prodding them to a better lifestyle to enslaving them to a certain lifestyle? Interesting comments, interesting questions. We'll talk about those in hour two. Stay tuned. Coming up next, we got our special guest joining us, Attorney Joseph Tully, representing Aaron O'Neill and the People versus Aaron O'Neill medical marijuana grow prosecution going on right now in California. Stay tuned. We're back after this.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Don't want to spend money on a night out, but don't know what to do other than watching TV or playing video games? Consider playing guitar, bass, banjo, or mandolin. The instrument will give you hours of entertainment with friends with minimal expense. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
Tokers, there's no good reason to get your dog stoned. While it might not harm them physically, imagine being a dog who already begs for treats all day, and then imagine that dog having the munchies. Not cool.
You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
The Supreme Court is wrong on the Second Amendment.
Okay, maybe you're high, too.
Ignite the conversation on some trending topics along the Cannabis Radio social media network. Join our crew of thousands on our Cannabis Radio page on Facebook or at Canna Radio, CANNA Radio on Twitter. Plus, look for our Facebook and Google Plus pages for all of our original programs and connect with Dr. Dina, Kyle Cushman, Dr. Mitch Earlywine, Nurse Heather, Doc Rob, the hosts of Ganjapreneur, and more. Connect with the growing Cannabis Radio social crusade at Canna Radio on Twitter or search for Cannabis Radio on Facebook, Google Plus, and Instagram and grow with us.
In the marijuana law reform movement, the cannabis community is represented by thousands of dedicated defense attorneys fighting to end prohibition and keep us free. The Russ Belville Show visits with the tireless courtroom crusaders in our legalization, law, and order.
Welcome back, everybody. It's just about 31 after the hour, and for our legalization, law, and order today, we're speaking with attorney Joseph Tully, who is representing Aaron O'Neill in the People versus Aaron O'Neill case down in California. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me on.
Glad to have you here. I received an email from an advocate who was trying to inform me about this case, which I think is a surprise to a lot of people when we say, yes, this is a medical marijuana grower in California who's being prosecuted. Give our listeners the basic executive summary of what's going on in this case.
Well, my client is well known for being an expert in growing high CBD strains of medical marijuana. Because he's such a big advocate, he's cured people, he's helped people. He cashed in his 401k and bought property and planted about 270 high CBD strains of cannabis plants. There was a report of a deer shooting on the property, and Fish and Game became involved, and then Fish and Game said to the sheriff, reported him to the sheriff's department because of all the plants, and then a raid was conducted. He was arrested. His wife might have been arrested in the raid initially, and I think the CPS came to take his kids away as well. So there's always a lot of issues. They try to make it as difficult as possible on people.
Which county are we talking about here?
We're talking about El Dorado County, which is between like Sacramento and the Tahoe area.
Right. Okay. So kind of northeastern California.
Yes, sir.
All right. And so this isn't federal. This isn't DEA going in and getting upset about these CBD plants. This is county sheriffs, and this is going to state court now, right?
Yes, we're in state court. We're in the middle of jury trial right now.
My goodness. Now, there's really no distinction in the California law that helps as far as these being CBD plants that really aren't destined for the recreational market, correct?
Correct. Yeah, marijuana is marijuana. So there is kind of a old wives' tale or urban myth kind of going around that if your plants are high in CBD or low enough in THC that it doesn't qualify as marijuana, but that's simply not true. Anything with the genetics of a cannabis plant is considered marijuana, and they will charge you for it.
So there have been numerous bills that have been signed that make up the medical marijuana regulations, the new regulations for California. Is this due to these new regulations that this prosecution is possible, or is this something that's always been possible under California law?
This is something that has always been possible under California law and is still possible despite Proposition 215 being passed and despite California Senate Bill 420 being passed.
Is it just the sheer number of plants in the allegation?
Not necessarily. I mean, normally speaking, the federal government will leave you alone if it's under, so many thousands of plants. It would be like the lead homicide detective won't, give out a parking ticket. It's kind of beneath them. So the feds kind of leave you alone. I think the amount of plants is something, but I think there's politics involved. And in this particular case, I believe it's the personality of the prosecuting attorney and the particular political sentiment of that county.
Okay, so El Dorado County being one of those counties that say in 2010 wasn't on the side of passing that Prop 19, for example?
That's correct, yes.
So let's talk about this prosecuting attorney. And has he made statements in the press in the past, or has he been known to just be, really anti-marijuana and gone after it this way before?
Yes, he is anti-marijuana. So, for instance, there on the books, it was clear, when 215 passed in 1996, that concentrated cannabis is a form of cannabis, and as long as the amount of cannabis that you have on you is reasonably related to your medical conditions, you're fine. Well, this prosecutor, and on the jury instructions, it reflected that, and in case law, it reflected that. So concentrated cannabis wasn't treated any differently than marijuana. But this prosecutor got it in his mind that he was going to make concentrated cannabis illegal. And he talked two county judges into this. And there was a gentleman by the name of Mulcravey, and it's a published case. They would not let him argue the Compassionate Use Act defense because they said, well, this is concentrated cannabis, so it's not covered by the law. And, his attorney said, it was. And they wouldn't let him argue that it was covered, and therefore he was convicted. It went up on appeal. The Attorney General's office, who covers appeals for the prosecution side, they didn't oppose the defense. So the defense said, hey, listen, these guys are ignoring the law. It needs to go back to court with the proper admonitions that they need to follow the law. The Attorney General's office didn't even oppose it. They said, basically, we agree with you guys that concentrated cannabis is covered. But had it not been for the appellate court or for the hardworking appellate attorneys, this prosecutor and as far as I'm concerned, two Superior Court judges would have been involved in conspiracy to falsely imprison somebody.
So there was no. He's been stopped from this from doing this. Now he's not doing it any further after this decision.
Well, yeah, he got slapped down on that decision, but in my current case. My client happened to be on probation for something totally different. And he just wrote this motion kind of off the top of his head. I have very young lawyers here, and they read it, and they were laughing at how ignorant he was of the law and just how stupid his motions were. And he said, basically in his motion, Judge, Mr. O'Neill was on probation at the time of this arrest. Therefore, the Compassionate Use Act and or Senate Bill 420 defenses should not apply to him. And I had to fight and fight and fight and fight and fight, even though there's a law clearly on the books that the DA didn't let the judge know about, which is unethical. The DA should have known what he was arguing was not lawful. But the judges clearly, for whatever reason, are willing to go along with him. And like I said, I had to fight and fight and fight. And had I not fought and won, we would have been looking at an automatic conviction because we're not disputing that there was marijuana. It's just our defense is that it's covered by the Compassionate Use Act.
We're speaking with attorney Joseph Tully, who's representing Aaron O'Neill in a state case of growing hundreds of CBD-heavy medical marijuana plants in El Dorado County, California. And what are the stakes in this trial? What, if convicted, what could happen?
I mean, he's technically facing 3 years of prison, which, you know, he's a family man. You know, his goals are always to help people. He's a medical marijuana activist, and I don't want that to happen.
How can people, if they want to help out, is there anything they can do as far as court support or donations in any way?
I'm sure if people wanted to contribute to his legal costs, he would accept it. You know, he's just a good family man. He's an activist. He doesn't have a lot of money. I'm not making this trial about money. This trial, he's standing up for his principles, and I'm supporting him in that regard. So, you know, court support, you have to be really, really cautious of. A lot of times people are very vocal. If people do want to do court support in this case or any other case, I just would highly recommend, you know, dressing up as if you were going to a job interview. When you're in court, it's poker face, and you let the, you know, the respectfulness of your presence be the lobby issue rather than be vocal in court and yell or mutter or, you know, try to voice any opinions. That's actually can be distracting. And I've had situations where jurors that I thought were on my side of kind of were turned off by court support, you know, just certain individuals and kind of gone sideways on me.
Yeah, that's a really good point to be made there, that we want to make sure that the support is helpful sort of support. And this is just got to be frustrating to you, but on one side, because, you know, California is looking at potential marijuana legalization for 2016, much less the medical marijuana that's been legal since, you know, for almost 20 years now, that it's about CBD plants that aren't even designed for the recreational market. But another thing that I wanted to bring up is the fact that you're actually taking this to trial, because so many people, I think the stats like 96% of these cases just get pled out. Give us your thoughts behind that. Is this a moral stand that the defendant's taking?
I think so. You know, I've actually, you know, for whatever reason, I've had very good luck in, you know, cannabis related cases, and I've never lost a jury trial. And I think this is about my 7th or 8th consecutive jury trial on marijuana cases. But yeah, a lot of people are scared to go to trial. A lot of people, you know, when they're looking at a plea bargain, they cave in, or a lot of times attorneys are afraid to go to trial. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot of hard work. This is not easy by any means. I get raked over the coals daily by the judge, where, you know, I'm pretty aware of what my duties are and what I'm supposed to do in court and what's a legal objection and what isn't. And, you know, trial's very tough on defense attorneys. I'll tell you that.
Well, we're glad that you're out there doing that. Joseph Tully representing the case. Aaron O'Neill is the case. It's in El Dorado County. If you want to learn more, get your Google skills going. Look up these trials and learn more and tell people about them, because I think people would be shocked to know that, you know, somebody growing CBD plants in California would be facing state trial, not federal trial, but state trial. And hey, Joseph, thank you for being on our show and for everything you're doing for the cannabis community. And here's hoping that your winning streak continues.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for having me, and I salute your good work as well.
Oh, thank you so much. Very much appreciated. All right, folks, stay tuned. We'll have time for a radical rant, but before we go, a couple of quick news bits. Cannabis Cup in Denver, Colorado is being moved not just from Denver to Pueblo, but from 420 to 422. That's courtesy of KRDO Radio. And here at Cannabis Radio, we're happy to announce the Tommy Chong podcast is launching on March 2nd. Tommy and his son Paris Chong bringing their podcasting talents to this network, where my level of fame on the network just decreased exponentially. As if I had any. Hey, we're back with the rant right after this. Stick around.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Hey everybody, it's Radical Russ here from 420 Radio, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
Georgia. Hi, this is Willie Nelson. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 1920s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
Earn your PhD in THC monetization with CannabisRadio.com. Don't be late.
Coming soon to a city near you, Cannabis Finance Boot Camp. Get all your cannabis accounting, legal, and compliance questions answered by their knowledgeable panel of industry experts who want to help your cannabis boom. Whether you're a grower, dispensary operator, or a newcomer to the field, your cannabis needs Cannabis Finance Boot Camp. For information on upcoming events, visit CannabisFinanceBootCamp.com.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
That marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug.
Some think there won't be room for them in jail. We'll make room.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it and didn't inhale.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
Radical Rant. Well, I'm coming to you live from Texas today, Arlington, Texas, right between the D and the FW. And I'm thinking a lot about how Texas moves forward on marijuana legalization and other reforms. And there's been a bunch of stories that have come out of Texas recently that give me some insight. And I believe that if Texas were an initiative state, this could be done in a couple of years, really. The problem is you got to go through the political arena here in this state. You got to go through the legislature, and the politicians are so far behind the people on this issue. The first story I would think of would be the story of Alexis, Team Alexis. She's the little 9-year-old girl who is using medical marijuana, and she had to flee Texas to go to Colorado because she found that her parents found, I should say, that this worked for her and gave her great relief and a life to look forward to. And so those parents have to make that decision. Do we leave Texas? Do we leave our home, the people we love, the climate we love, maybe the politics we love? Who knows? But do we leave all that, everything we've known, our jobs and families and roots, and we move to Colorado so our daughter can have a life? Well, of course you move. But that doesn't mean you want to, and it doesn't mean you forget about the other people who maybe don't have the means, the ability to be able to move. So I think about that story, and I think about how much play that's getting here in Texas, and people are learning more about that, and how Alexis is going to be a speaker at this Southwest Cannabis Conference and Expo that's taking place the next couple of days. And Sean McAllister from DFW NORML is going to be the MC both days as well, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of information out to the attendees as they go through the different panels and different speakers. But for a 9-year-old girl to want to, stand up at a major conference, and they're expecting, 6,000 people here, and to be able to stand up on stage and make a plaintiff call for her medicine to be legal in her state, she could go back to the school she used to go to and see all her school friends that she's had to leave behind since she's moved to Colorado. I think that's going to be incredibly moving and touching, and will really get to Texans' sense of family. This is a kind of a place where people are very family oriented. And there's also kind of a, the old anti-littering slogan, don't mess with Texas, right? There's a libertarian streak. There's an independent streak, a rejection of federal authority and such that I think could be played on. And especially in a situation where you're talking medical cannabis for a little girl, I think that's the kind of thing you could play on here. And if it were an initiative state, bam, 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 you'd have, a medical marijuana law where this girl could stay at home. And I also, the story that came to me recently about Ann Lee's organization, Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition, RAMP, at RAMP GOP, and how her organization was turned away from the Texas Republican Party's convention. A Republican organization, RAMP GOP. And there's all sorts of Republican organizations that are on the fringes of Republican ideology that have always at least gotten some respect as far as we'll welcome your views, even if we disagree with them. The first one that comes to mind would be Log Cabin Republicans, right? The gay Republican group. And I didn't have the time to research this to check out, how do the Log Cabin Republicans, do they have a booth at the Texas thing? I was reading some story that mentioned how both sides of the immigration debate got to have booths at the Texas GOP convention, but they're going to dismiss the Texas RAMP GOP, the Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. Now, Mrs. Ann Lee, 85-year-old, salt of the earth, Republican, conservative, Christian, pro-life Texas woman, would be so such the perfect person to be at such a Republican convention. And then like the other people working in the group, all diehard conservatives for whom they've just recognized that the war on marijuana violates all conservative principles. At least if you're not just giving that lip service, if you really meant that stuff about small government, efficient government, personal responsibility, individual liberty, states' rights, if you really believe that stuff, then you'd have to at least entertain listening to RAMP GOP. But no, I'm going to ban them. We can't even bear to bring it up. And this is where you start to recognize that the drug war has a sense of religion to it. There's a religious aspect to prohibition. It's born a lot from religion and racism in certain ways, but the drug war itself maintains a sort of magical thinking that is normally reserved for religion and a refusal to question that authority, to question that dogma, that to be antithetical to the belief system. Blasphemy, heresy, apostate. Those kind of concepts you'd get from religion are leveled toward people like Ann Lee and RAMP GOP that would dare to question the orthodoxy of we hate drugs, we're anti-drug. And it's interesting to me to see these kinds of things happening where we can't even talk about it. And the way that we react to cannabis, and not just in Texas, but around the country, even in some of the legal states, is kind of weird. Like Washington State's going through a thing here where they're trying to figure out how to label their marijuana edibles to protect children. We want to make sure kids would know that marijuana edible, that edible product that looks like candy, that's something that's got marijuana in it, and that's not for kids. If only we could come up with some way, and it can't be a word because, it has to be a kid, even a small kid, symbol, right? It has to be something even a kid that can't read yet would know represents marijuana, and something a foreigner even would know that's the symbol for marijuana. Something iconic, like a logo, like a simple one color logo that would represent something has marijuana in it. I know, the pot leaf, right? Duh, right? No, Washington freaked out about that. Can't have the pot leaf on stuff. It might encourage kids to try it because it's got marijuana in it. Wait a minute. We're supposed to be finding something that tells them there's marijuana in it. What could be better than the symbol that everyone knows stands for marijuana? Nope, can't have that. Then there was another proposal that I can't remember if this was Washington State or somewhere else, but we can't have the green cross because in Europe, green crosses stand for pharmacies, and we wouldn't want our European visitors walking into a dispensary and thinking it's a pharmacy. Hell, most of the Europeans would walk into the dispensary and be happy to see it. And then the dumbest move I've heard is to resurrect. Do you remember Mr. Yuck? Mr. Yuck is mean. Mr. Yuck is green. People my age, now I'm 46 years old. People in that era, you'll recognize that. That was the ad campaign behind this little sticker. And it was for poison control. And it was this green, frowny face making a yuck with sticking his tongue out little symbol. The idea is we put Mr. Yuck on, because the skull and crossbones, you see, that's what we used to do for poisonous stuff. Put the skull and crossbones on it, but too many kids were associating with skull and crossbones with pirates. True story. This is why this came up, right? They were associating skull and crossbones with pirates, so we had to get rid of that and go with Mr. Yuck, this green sticker that said this is poison. We put that on the Drano, we put that on the laundry soap, and all the stuff you don't want kids to get into. Mr. Yuck is mean. Mr. Yuck is green. Don't eat things with Mr. Yuck in them. So it is the stupidest idea to put that on marijuana edibles, because what happens when the kid sees the parent eat the edible that's got the Mr. Yuck on it? They'll start to recognize, oh, Mr. Yuck is for fun adult stuff, especially if those adults start getting the giggles and having a good time on edibles, right? And then they're going to say, oh, well, the Mr. Yuck thing is something adults can eat, so I can try the Drano, I can try the laundry soap, whatever the hell. And it's just getting to a point where this fear of the symbol, we can't even talk about it. We can't talk about it at the conservative conventions. We can't display it at the Philadelphia Flower Show. That was another story I got to cover this week. The Philadelphia Flower Show, Philadelphia Horticultural Society has this annual show, huge East Coast, everything you want to know about flowers, right? And they got every flower you want to see. Well, Philly Normal and Green Rush Advisors teamed up, and they were going to put this booth together. Now, not to show actual cannabis flowers, because it's Pennsylvania. One of the notorious 9 that still have absolute prohibition. No, there's not going to be any cannabis flowers. Just pictures. We're just going to have pictures of cannabis. We're just going to show you what it looks like in an informational booth. Well, Horticulture Society lost its mind because there got to be some promotion of this event to talk about decriminalization and how Pennsylvania needed to move forward on medical marijuana and so forth. The flower people didn't want it to all become a political thing, and so they canceled their booth. They couldn't even display pictures of cannabis. Now, I think that's an excuse. I think they'd have found a way to shut them down otherwise, but the activists gave them kind of an easy out by adding the political element. You know, keep it to just, we're going to talk about cannabis as a flower, what this flower does. And I think they could have at least made it harder to deny that. But the kicker on that story is that the Philadelphia Flower Show has no problem with displaying live poppies and live salvia. Plenty of poppies and salvia for you if you want to check those out. But no, not the cannabis pictures. We can't even show pictures of cannabis. So I think what these stories all kind of interweave in between them is how we're winning, because there's this fear of even talking about it, of even bringing the subject up, this religious fear of it, because if anybody starts seriously questioning the dogma, it's all over. Prohibition is all over once anybody starts seriously questioning what the hell's going on in trying to ban a flower. All right, folks, that's all the time we got for Hour 1. Stay tuned. Hour 2 Toker Talk Radio is up next. We'll take your calls at 971-533-7111. We'll also be watching the chat room for our discussions. We got plenty more to talk about here in Arlington, Texas. We're live. Also, considering doing a meetup on Monday night, maybe a dinner for you Texas-related fans. If you're here in the Texas area, maybe we'll have dinner. For everyone here at DFW Normal Headquarters and CannabisRadio.com, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.